This series has been extraordinary for a number of reasons, but I'm so grateful that I get a chance to introduce to you some amazing Augustana College students who will be our panelists. I'll introduce first our panelists from your left to your right, and then our convener and facilitator of the panel. So first, I'll introduce Kara West, whose majors include women's, gender, and sexuality studies. In fact, that's a common major for all of our panelists, so I'll say that once for all, and then you'll hear that Kara, for instance, also majors in psychology and Spanish and comes to the Quad Cities from Grinnell, Iowa. Next is Bailey Hacker, who has also majors in psychology, disability studies, and theater, and comes to us from Kansas, Illinois. Hopefully there's an Illinois, Kansas, just for reciprocation. Next is Elena Hafner. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong, because Elena and I actually go back a little ways. I can't get that wrong. Actually, it's Lexi Golab, whose additional majors are psychology and creative writing, and she comes to the Quad Cities from Chicago. And the reason I'm sorry I messed up on Elena, because she actually joined us last year and went on a lobbying trip to Springfield and did some great work lobbying on behalf of higher education in the state of Illinois. So that's why I really didn't want to screw up her name, as I did. But her other majors her other major is history, and she is from Wyoming, Illinois. But I wanted to reserve special thanks for the convener and facilitator of today's panel, Dr. Jennifer Heacock-Renaud, because some of you who are here for the first one have already heard from her. But you need to know that this series came together through her efforts. We had some ideas we were working on over the summer. Nothing seemed to gain traction until I sent out a very pitiable email, and taking pity on me was Dr. Heacock-Renaud, who really got the ball rolling. So I wanted to add my personal thanks, as well as the thanks of all those of you who have enjoyed and will enjoy this series, to our convener and facilitator, Dr. Jennifer Heacock-Renaud.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay in the microphone? Okay, awesome. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us here today, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here again, and especially to be surrounded by such brilliant students. And they're going to do most of the talking today, and they've worked really hard on this. I'm really excited. So you have up here on the screen our title slide, Barbie as a Feminist Icon, a panel discussion of Greta Gerwig's 2023 Blockbuster. So I'm going to give a little bit of background information before I turn it over to the panelists to weigh in on some questions. So as we know, Greta Gerwig's Barbie film has really taken the world by storm this calendar year, earning more than $1.36 billion across the globe, according to Forbes. It's the highest grossing film in the 100-year history of the Warner Brothers company. It is also the highest grossing film ever from a female filmmaker at the domestic box office, which is really exciting. Over the summer, as some of you probably saw and maybe participated in, giddy throngs of fans clad in pink with sparkly bags and high heels and stretchy headbands and some in vintage attire flocked to theaters around the country, and this drew the attention of some major news outlets who reported on this phenomenon, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Guardian. Fans in New York City, here are some headlines, by the way, of the pink phenomenon, or Barbie mania of summer 2023, so you can appreciate the news coverage on this. So the New York Times did interview fans in Manhattan, just outside of movie theaters, and the fans indicated that the film really felt like a celebration of feminism and femininity. And so I've included some of the quotes from this New York Times piece so you can see fan reactions here. We've got, "It felt like we were getting together and having a holiday about girliness." Another who said, "You could feel the excitement, the energy, and the joy in the theater at this screening." And another viewer remarked, "The movie was a really great commentary on the difficulties of being a woman, but also how beautiful it is at the same time, and this dichotomy that seems to exist in womanhood between difficulty and beauty, I suppose." So these are some of the positive reactions to the film, but of course not all reactions to the film have been positive. It seems that the energy and the mass market appeal and the potential feminism in Gerwig's film seemed to strike a nerve with some viewers, conservative viewers. So we've got good old Elon Musk, owner of Tesla and now X, formerly known as Twitter, who mockingly stated, if you take a shot every time Barbie says the word patriarchy in the film, you'll pass out before the movie ends, and not in a good way. Then we have Ginger Gates, who went viral with this, is the spouse of State Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida. Sure some of you know this famous couple. I will not go into the history of Matt Gaetz here, but his spouse lamented that the film neglects any, quote, notion of faith or family, and pushes the idea that men and women can't collaborate positively, parentheses, yuck. And then she went on to tweet a thumbs down for the disappointingly low T from Ken, with T presumably standing in for testosterone. So we have viewers that are very bothered by what they're perceiving as, you know, an emasculated cast of Kens in the film. And she's not the only one to comment about this online. Then we have Movie Guide, I bumped ahead here. Movie Guide, which is a Christian movie review site, issued a warning that parents should not take their daughters to see the film because of its inclusion of LGBTQ stories and its inclusion of trans performer Hari Nef, who plays Dr. Barbie in the film. Some viewers didn't even realize that Hari Nef is a trans artist, right? But we have a website that's issuing warnings about inclusion of LGBTQ stories and trans actors and performers. Then we have Fox News, of course, always weighing in. Host Rachel Campos Duffy complained that, quote, the left has given Barbie a complete feminist makeover, and that was not in a good way, claiming that the film was just, quote, another indoctrination vehicle. Conservative pundit Ben Shapiro, maybe some of you are aware of, deemed the film woke and decided to burn a Barbie doll in effigy. Online, there's no shortage of news articles that deem the film a man-hating manifesto, and for a while, conservatives attempted to implement a Barbie boycott using a hashtag. The backlash, however, that we're seeing up on the screen there, did not seem to deter the public from mass consumption of Gerwig's film, and I think that that's a really important thing to consider. So what we'll consider in the panel today is Gerwig's construction of gender and sexuality, and precisely whether this film really does remake Barbie into a feminist icon. And this question has actually proven to be a rather vexing one for feminists for decades. So the Barbie brand has often been couched in a language of empowerment for girls and women, and like the film says, perhaps Barbie was made to show girls that they can do and be anything, right? So an astronaut, a doctor, a Nobel Prize winner, and even the president of the United States. At the same time, unhealthy body image and beauty standards, the environmental harm of mass-produced plastics, the capitalist power of Mattel, and Barbie's constant heteronormative pairing with Ken have been feminist concerns since the doll was launched in 1959. And I think, you know, Sasha, who's played by Ariana Greenblatt in Gerwig's film, eloquently summarizes these points when Barbie descends on the school cafeteria, expecting a really, you know, positive welcome from these adolescent girls who are there, and Sasha gets angry and lays into Barbie. And Sasha says, "You've been making women feel bad about themselves since you were invented. You represent everything wrong with our culture. Sexualized capitalism, unrealistic physical ideals. You set the feminist movement back 50 years. You destroy girls' innate sense of worth, and you're killing the planet with your glorification of rampant consumerism." So I think what we'll be trying to do today is unpack Barbie as a fraught cultural icon, a site unto which many of our cultural anxieties and aspirations about gender and sexuality have been projected historically. And our panelists will weigh in on and discuss a series of questions. We've planned a lot of material for you today. So to ensure that we make it through all of it, I'm going to pause at two different moments during the panel in which I'll invite your reactions, comments, and questions. And then we'll try to leave room at the end of the panel as well. And as always, I just ask that you be respectful of our panelists' views and interpretations of the film. So, we'll move to the very first question. Why do you think this film was so wildly successful? Who do you think Gerwig's intended audience is? I think the question of audience is an important one. I'm going to start with Lexi. Do you want to weigh in? I think it's on.
Is it?
Yep.
Or it should be green.
Yeah. Press. Take mine.
I'm switching my electronics.
All right. So when I first heard about this movie, I am a fan of Greta Gerwig as a director. And so I was surprised to hear that she was going to be taking part in creating this film. I think when I first heard about the Barbie movie, I expected it to sort of be along the lines of the Lego movie, which is like making fun of like toys and dolls, and it wouldn't have anything pertinent to comment on. But I changed my mind when I realized Greta Gerwig was directing it, because I know she always has a lot to say. And so for the intended audience, I think this is a film that it spoke to ordinary women, everyday women. I think it offered a complex conversation and like a commentary on more of like the human experience, not just like the female experience. And so not only ordinary women, but just like everyday ordinary people who just were seeking some form of entertainment and willing to go deeper than that as well. I think I was expecting almost like a generational backlash to Barbie, just because it's like, you know, it's all typically for younger audiences. Maybe people thought it was intended for specifically younger girls. But I feel like we didn't see that as much. And it offered more of just like, again, an everyday sort of person who could go and enjoy this film.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna pass it to Elena next to weigh in on audience and why this is so wildly successful.
Yeah, so, I mean, as it says in, like, when I first saw the trailer says, if you hate Barbie, this movie is for you. If you love Barbie, this movie is for you. And so it has a lot to say, like, it feels like a love letter to Barbie, and like, you know, I know, like when I was watching it, I saw dolls that I was like, oh my god, I remember that Barbie. I totally saw that Barbie in the store. And my mom, I went and saw it with my mom, and she also, there were Barbies that she saw, and she's like, oh my god, I remember that Barbie. And so it felt like a kind of this love letter to the brand and to like that, but it also was kind of a critique of like, you know, the Barbie brand and like some of the things that Barbie represents. And then going deeper, it also felt like the same was reflected in its approach to feminism. It felt very much like a love letter to a lot of like types of feminism, but then it also felt like a sort of critique. You know, and it really highlights like the like sisterhood and coalition and like working together as women and acknowledging each other's differences. And I just felt like, you know, everyone could take something from it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, let's go to Kara.
Yeah, so I actually went and saw the movie with my boyfriend this summer. I dragged him out to go see it with me as a date. It wasn't too hard to convince him, but something that I think is interesting is what's in the film is not only inspiring for women or people who grew up as women and sort of have experienced this like oppression in really subtle ways, I think is the thing. Like something that we talked about while we were discussing this is that at no point in time is Ken like clearly malicious. There's not violence as far as he doesn't hurt Barbie, he doesn't go out of his way to be overtly aggressive to Barbie, but the way that he's acting and the choices that he makes still hurt her and still hurt her friends, right? The way that the Kens are acting are still really harmful, even though we wouldn't call them criminal behavior. I mean, taking over her house is one thing, and we'll talk about that later. But there's never a point, any of the like violence in the film is fake and intentionally made fun of. And so that's sort of my take on it, is that like it's supposed to be cheeky, it's supposed to be in your face, so that while you're watching it, if you're feeling like, hey, maybe I'm a guy and maybe I've said something similar like that to someone that I'm dating, or maybe I've spoken to my mom that way, or maybe I am holding this belief about the women around me. It doesn't feel like an attack, I would hope. My boyfriend didn't feel attacked. Shout out to that guy. I was watching him pretty closely to make sure he wasn't like laughing when he shouldn't have been, but he was not. So it was good. But like I said, I think that it's good that it shows the more covert ways, so the less obvious ways that don't feel like a super like awful attack on the women around us, but still are really hurtful, especially when they build up over time, and the attitudes that are sort of underlying all of that. So I think that's a really cool message. It also, like with Sasha and how she sort of like expresses, even at like a pretty young age, how frustrated she is with like the patriarchy and things that she's going through and the system that she lives in. I think if I was a father watching that, right, I might be like, oh wow, like, am I sending this message to my daughter? Am I sending this message to my kids? Am I reproducing this in a way that is harming them? Because, you know, Sasha, we would think, oh, she's like in middle school, she doesn't really know, but like, kids know, right? Kids understand things at a more complex level than we think. So actually, in that kind of way, I do think that it was a good, positive film for men without being a little too strong to feel like an attack, which again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But.
Yeah, let's hear from Bailey as well.
So I originally said that I thought the audience was mothers between the ages of 25 and 50, but now I think I'm backtracking to say maybe 35 and 50, mainly because of the montage at the end. Like when I was watching it, I was like, my mom would cry watching this. I might not, but my mom would cry watching this. And I think the movie was very successful because, and I say this with all love towards this movie, but it's very much scratching the surface of feminism. Because like for me, when people are like, this is an extremely feminist film, I was like, not really. But it does, you know, cover very basic concepts of feminism, so it'd be a good intro to feminism if, like, let's say your dad didn't know anything about feminism, you'd be like, oh yeah, here's a movie that very much gives it in a palatable way. But yeah, it very much scratched the surface, and that was kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna use that one because I think the battery is dead. Yeah, I'll share my viewpoint as well, I suppose, on this one. I mean, personally, I felt the film was targeting mothers and daughters, I guess because I am a mom. Maybe that's why I felt that way. I also think there's like a class dimension to it. I think it is intending to speak to women with some capital power, right? Like middle class, upper class women from different generations who maybe would feel nostalgia for the Barbie dolls that they saw on screen, like Elena's mom. Oh, I played with that Barbie, right? And the fashions that span different historical periods. And remember maybe when they used to play with these dolls with their children. But I mean, I certainly don't think that the film is limited to that audience, but I think that might have been a focus group for Gerwig. I feel this way because of the focus on the relationship between the mom, played by America Ferrara, and her daughter, Sasha, in the film. And this kind of journey is just as important as Barbie's journey, is just as important as Ken's journey. And I think like what the film is trying to show in a lot of ways is like how motherhood often becomes an all-consuming identity for women with children, and that your life often becomes your child while your needs, your wants, your ambitions are put on hold, and you forget a bit who you used to be. And then when your child is older and it doesn't depend on you as much anymore, you have to sort of figure out, okay, what's my identity now? And do I remake my identity? Who am I at this point? And just maybe feeling a little lost as a person because, your children's lives have kind of taken over yours. And I feel this way too because the mom in the film says, oh, I'm just a boring mom. And really, she's an incredibly interesting person. She makes these really dark and sort of mysterious drawings of Barbie, right? And this is why Barbie, stereotypical Barbie in Barbie Land, starts to have like these thoughts of death, right? And fears about cellulite and all this stuff, right? Is because the mom is drawing these Barbies in the real world. And so I think that she's anything but boring, but I think she's kind of in a slump. And I think too, that the lines of that Billie Eilish song that play during that photo montage that Bailey was referencing really speak to moms who are feeling lost. I mean, it sort of speaks to the human experience, I think, but like for me personally, watching the film and seeing all these images of this mom playing with her child, right? Those lines really just like kind of made me think, you know, I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what I was made for. What was I made for, right? And so just kind of thinking about how motherhood is constructed, you know, patriarchally in the society that we inhabit, I think is important. The next thing I want to talk about is this backlash that I was referencing in the introduction. So, you know, why do you think the film sparked a backlash among some conservative groups, politicians, and media? And I'm going to pass the mic down to Kara to start on this one.
So I think that there's obviously a lot that we can unpack with this question.
Please keep the mic closer to your mouth.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
I can hear my voice now. Okay. I think, I was just saying it, there's a lot that we can unpack here and a lot of reasons why people had different reactions. So a lot of us up here are studying psychology, but there's a really big concept in psychology, especially when it comes to social psychology and when it comes to tension and discrimination and all of that, and it's called loss aversion. So when a group in power perceives that they are losing power, that feels way more intense than it actually is, and there's more of an effort to avoid losing any power than even to gain power. And so I think something that came to my mind right away when I saw the backlash to the movie was, okay, so we have this system that's been in place for a long time. We have people, especially conservative media, who are actively making money off of that system staying in place, right? I don't have anything personally against the people who consume that media. There are lots of family members of mine who do consume that media. They are, you know, people are making money off of them continuing to consume that media. And so I think when something feels like an attack because another group is getting a little bit more, just a tiny bit more representation, right? There's just a little bit more discussion being had about feminism in like the broader public media scale with a movie like this. It feels like a huge, huge loss. And so the attack that comes back against that is like a really deeply rooted sort of thing. And that's something that if you look into it and you like social science, you can see that across the board with any kind of group in power that is sort of losing power as another group is feeling more heard and represented. But I think the other thing too is a lot of these values are sort of based on morals, especially with, you know, just in general. I think then also the morals are based on this patriarchal system, right? We're told that like this is the right way to have a household, this is the right way to live a life, this is the right way to be. And for some people it works, right? Just wanting to be a mother, wanting to have a nuclear family isn't a bad thing. But when it becomes this like super deeply rooted, like it's either this or you're bad, then that's also where that attack comes in, because something that seems like maybe it's attacking that seems immoral, and it's much easier to paint that as immoral and be like, this movie is evil, it's awful, it's bad. When in reality, it isn't. It might feel that way, but I don't know, hopefully that makes sense. That's sort of like my understanding of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Lexi next on this one.
So, I don't know if you guys remember when Barbie was first coming out, but at the same time, coming out on the same day, the movie Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan, was also coming out. And so while some people took that as a chance to be like, yay, double feature, we can go see Barbie and Oppenheimer and support these like both super successful directors, other people saw it maybe as like a challenge, like who's gonna win, Barbie versus Oppenheimer. And so I feel like because Barbie so greatly outperformed Oppenheimer in the initial like box office weekend, there's some resentment that a lot of people felt towards a film that's really centered on women and women's experiences, directed by a woman, doing better than a film that was directed by a man, centered on a man. And so there was definitely, I feel like, an economic backlash that kind of fueled a lot of conservative media. Also, I feel this film did play to a lot of stereotypes about men and objectifying men in a way as well, as a way to kind of like over the top of like reversal of these gender roles, to kind of play to humor and to reach, you know, a wider audience and to have that be more receptive. And so one thing I noticed, perfect. So one thing I noticed in particular was Ken, the main Ken, Barbie's Ken, and his the objectification of his abs, and how sort of throughout the movie his abs are kind of seen as powerful. I remember at the end when, you know, men default to war and their abs become a weapon almost, in addition to their tennis rackets. And so the objectification of Ken's ab power was definitely something that was shown repeatedly through the film. And you know, in terms of though like men being offended by that, what I feel like a lot of people forget to realize is they were offended about things that women experience in the real world all the time in typically like male-dominated movies. The role of women in those movies is then as these sort of, you know, objectified, over-sexualized side character. And so in this movie, those are reversed. And so I feel like that's something that's not typically seen. There was backlash surrounding that. At the same time though, like the film doesn't just only like play to the stereotypes about men, it also does play to the stereotypes about women and make jokes about that as well. So it's kind of like Gerwig does a really great thing of playing to both stereotypes, like the dumb blonde trope often seen about women in films directed by men. Stereotypical Barbie is just that. She doesn't do anything special, doesn't have any special skills. She's not Dr. Barbie. She's not any other Barbie. She's just the stereotypical blonde Barbie. And it also plays to the stereotypes of women being confused about money, or, you know, wearing glasses and then taking them off and that's what makes you beautiful. Or the let us show you, the Kens showing the Barbies how to play sports. Like all of those things are very common stereotypes you see that Gerwig plays to in a way that I feel like just raises awareness about the stereotypes that are often seen in this film, and some people just didn't like the way that it was perhaps illustrated. And so that definitely sparked some backlash as well.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on this one too about the backlash. I mean, I think it's important to think about mind-body dualism throughout history on this one too. So historically, you know, men have been affiliated with the realm of the mind and intellectualism, the realm of culture, and domination of public spaces. And women, in contrast, have been more associated with the body, subject to objectification, sexualization, you know, relegated to the private sphere. Their needs, concerns, ideas, aspirations historically have been depicted as devoid of substance or frivolous. And so the film, I think, touches a nerve in that it does reverse that long-standing pattern, which of course is really entrenched in structures of power. So the men here are just, you know, ridiculous. Making war with toy ponies and such, right? Their intellectualism is mocked. Their entire existence revolves around the Barbies. They don't even exist in their own right. You know, it's Barbie and Ken. The Barbies have the real jobs, while Ken is just beach, right? I'm just books. Ken is just beach. He's not even a lifeguard. He's there as decoration, as eye candy. And I think that touched a nerve, you know, with this concept we call male fragility, which involves anxiety and insecurities that men sometimes feel about falling short of cultural expectations of manhood, and which often center on dominating and outperforming women in many ways. And the movie even alludes directly to this concept of fragility when Ken is singing. The lyrics, if you listen, are, "Is it my destiny to live and die a life of blonde fragility?" Which I think is a really interesting line with maybe multiple layers. But yeah, I think, you know, touches a nerve in that it activates some insecurities in our culture about what masculinity is able to tolerate, right? What hegemonic masculinity is able to tolerate. I want to move on to talking about depictions of patriarchy. Since Elon Musk says we should take a shot every time the movie says patriarchy, well, we should probably unpack that. How does the film depict patriarchy? This is kind of a loaded question. I'm going to go to Bailey first for this one.
So, patriarchy. So, what I was noticing as I was watching through it, and my first watch through was actually for this panel, because I did not see it over the summer, so I was already going in with a very critical lens. So, but yeah, so when I was watching through the movie, it was very much Barbie was finally feeling patriarchy in the real world, and Ken was seeing it, and he was liking how patriarchy was, like he was like, oh my gosh, the men rule here. And it was very much tongue-in-cheek, but it was still very apparent that neither one of them were aware of how they were being treated in their world, because in a way, Ken was oppressed in Barbie land, but I use that term very, 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 very lightly, because he really isn't. But it just very much spoke to like the otherness and the structures of power in each of their worlds. And it was really only in the real world that Barbie and Ken actually fight about anything, and it's because of patriarchy. Like Barbie's very much surprised as to why Ken's suddenly acting so different than what he normally ever had. And also in the real world itself, like Mattel as the company was very obviously a patriarchal space, and like this entire scene just made me laugh because all the executives are men. They're all men designing Barbies, and even though it's Heacock-Renaud, right? Yeah, her drawings are amazing, but she's not in the boardroom with the other executive designers. So they're using a woman's ideas to market to women, which is very much on brand as to what consumerism is in America. There was also just two quotes that stood out to me of, we had a woman CEO in the 90s, and I'm a man with no power, does that make me a woman? And both of those just was like, they know what they're doing with that one. And I think a lot of men also think about that, because if they're emasculated, they're like, well, does that suddenly make me a woman when I don't have power anymore? And, you know, it was just also the men from Mattel trying to put Barbie in a box to fix things. And it's just like very much silencing women, putting them in boxes to make everything easier for men. So just everything with patriarchy in the movie was very much in your face. But I also argue at the end of the movie, when they save Barbie Land from patriarchy, it actually never goes away, because it's so difficult to, you know, break down the chains of patriarchy, because once it's there, you really can't escape it.
Yeah. Elena.
Yeah, so along with that, there are lots of cultural symbols of manhood in the film. So we think of lots of like pop culture references. So the references to The Godfather, there's like the Rocky posters, and there's like lots of pictures of Sylvester Stallone in his big old fur coat. Kind of the soulless corporate environment that Ken is hanging out in. The presentations of war and Ken's making war, they had lots of little nods, if you like caught them, to like male or like masculine movies. So the beach volleyball, they have a reference to Top Gun. They have obviously the references to the movie Grease and like Grease Lightning. The horses, the whole thing with horses. And it's interesting because it's sort of this, it's kind of pointing out the ridiculousness of these like designated male cultural like touchstones. I thought it was really interesting. It's sort of turning it on its head how our culture tends to make fun of the like cultural touchstones that are designated as feminine. So you think of the pushback against Twilight, the pushback against this movie, the way people talk about like chick flicks or other like things that we tend to consider like feminine media. This movie kind of turns it on its head and is pointing out like, look at how ridiculous men's media can be as well. And so it's a little bit like, it's kind of cathartic to see how it presents it as like almost, this is also ridiculous in its own way.
Yeah, I think those are all really excellent comments. I think too, the movie does a really good job of showing that gender is constructed, right? So that it's a process, it's a structure, it's a stratification system that gender is learned, emulated, constantly performed, and it's not something innate. Because when Ken gets to the real world, he's literally looking to others for cues on how to construct masculinity, right? So he's looking to the TV screens and he's seeing these images of these male politicians and these other like mythical, canonic constructions of manhood with all the horses and the Hummers, right? And you know, here he is with a group of executives watching as one man is pointing, you know, putting his finger up at a woman who comes up to ask a question, and you know, Ken is watching and he's learning, right? He even goes to the library and checks out books on how to do patriarchy, right? So I think that it's very much a nod to the constructed nature of it. And I think one really important line is in that corporate space. He walks up to what presumably is, you know, a CEO of a company and says, well, are you not doing patriarchy here? And the man said, oh no, we are. We're doing it well. We just hide it better, right? And so it's this idea that like privilege works to conceal itself, right? Like makes itself pass as normalized and visible, so that people won't question just how constructed and artificial it ultimately is, right? And of course, like in the real world, Ken's having a blast while Barbie is like dealing with all these micro and macro aggressions that women deal with all the time, like tacit and explicit comments about their bodies. So when they're rollerblading on Venice Beach, right? And Ken is like, Barbie's talking about how she feels self-conscious, and Ken says, I'm not feeling any of that. I feel what could only be described as admired and not ogled, okay? And there's no undertone of violence, and Barbie says, mine definitely has an undertone of violence, right? And so we're seeing like very different experiences connected to the gender identity of the characters. And so I do feel like, you know, the film does a great job of that. At the same time, here's the men ogling, okay, Barbie on Venice Beach. At the same time, I wonder if you feel the film highlights and works to challenge harmful practices of patriarchy, are there moments where it casually reproduces patriarchal structures, I wonder? I'm gonna go to Bailey for this one.
Okay, so this was my biggest sticking point with the movie, was that, and I hope Gerwig did this as a way for us to notice it and call it out, but I can't say with full confidence that she did. But Barbie performs all the emotional labor in this film. At the end, when they take down the patriarchy in Barbie Land, Ken has what I've deemed a mantrum, which he basically like throws himself to the wall and is crying and is like, I'm just such a terrible person, like I'm just, like doesn't apologize, but it's just very much guilting Barbie into apologizing him for making him feel bad about a bad thing he did. And Barbie is the only one that apologizes, and every time she's like, oh, it's fine, like, whatever, he immediately thinks that now he can, like, get with her. And she's like, no, like, we don't have to do anything, like, it's just, like, just take the apology and move. And just that whole part I really hope Gerwig did intentionally, but I mean, that's something very real, and especially if you've lived a female experience, you've probably had at least one interaction or many interactions with men in your life where it's like you say, hey, please don't do this thing, and then they try to guilt you into feeling bad about it, and you're like, okay, where's that behavior learned from though? Because that's something men are taught growing up, which is a big issue. So that was something I hope Gerwig did intentionally for us to see it and see how covert it is, and I don't know. That's just something we may not notice right off the bat because it is so normalized in our culture. Let's see, what else was I gonna say? Oh, also at the end, the Mattel execs come in and they, well, so America for, but she presents her idea for the ordinary Barbie. Like she can be this or she can not be that. She can just be whatever she needs to be. And they hate the idea until they realize it could make money. And then they're like, okay, yeah, we'll sell that. They don't like a woman's idea until they can directly profit off of it in any way, shape, or form. And just, I think that's ways that the movie may recreate patriarchal ideas, but I would like to hope Gerwig did that so we see, okay, this is very normalized, and I hope after the movie like people pick up on this, but I can't say with full certainty if that was her intentions or not. So yeah.
Elena.
Yeah, I think as well, there are certain moments in the movie, one that I pointed out is when Barbie is preparing to go convince Ken to like, like fool Ken, you know, they like take him to the beach, and yeah. Before she's going over there, America Ferrera's character is doing her makeup, and she's worried that Ken will, if he'll still like her, and America has to remind her, like, he stole your house. And, you know, it's just, she isn't even, you know, we know this from the end of the movie, she isn't even in love with him, but because of kind of the patriarchy that she's dealt with within the movie, she's still so worried if he will still like her, you know, and I think you could interpret it as like in the context of she's hoping he'll still like her so that she can fool him, but it feels like there is a real fear within her of like, what if he doesn't like me anymore? And it's, you know, she like at the beginning of the movie, she never would have been worried about that, but like just this little interaction with patriarchy she does have already has changed so much about how she sees herself.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Kara next on this one.
Okay, so like I said earlier, I think that the way that Greta Gerwig shows patriarchy in this movie is intentionally, my interpretation that it is intentionally very cheeky, very like outlandish. Realistically, my boyfriend isn't gonna steal my house, right? He's, you know, like he's not gonna come in and decorate the whole thing with horses and call it his Mojo Dojo Casa house and kick me out, right? But a real possibility is that maybe we have kids, we start a family, and I'm responsible for the children, and I'm responsible for him. No one's responsible for me, right? Like that's more likely how it plays out. So we'll still have the house together, but if we're not careful and we just sort of fall into the normal systems that we grew up with, it could end up that way, you know, with all of a guy's best intentions. That is sort of how it goes. We see, a lot of us have probably seen our mothers or maybe our own selves struggle with having to hold the weight of the entire household, including the emotional labor, but also including cooking. I know there are lots of men who come home and expect food on the table, even today, when they've been at work all day, but now, most people in the country are now working all day, whether they're a mother, a father, or just an adult. Most people are working full-time jobs. So there's the added labor, something that we talk about a lot, especially in like feminist classes and stuff like that, is like, first of all, the way that the patriarchy was set up isn't even there anymore. So that's sort of like how I see it represented in that like cheeky, cartoonish, like, oh haha, Mojo Dojo Casa house, that is funny. But really what it's representing is like, this is Ken's space, even though like, maybe Barbie owns the house, maybe our moms signed the lease themselves and paid for the house, or you know, whatever the accomplishment was, the man can often take credit for it and not face any repercussions for that. So, yeah.
And we'll quickly go to Lexi on this too.
So for me, I do believe that Ken's failure to apologize to Barbie was very intentional on Gerwig's part. I'm a fan of Gerwig's work, and I've followed her throughout movies she's done, like Lady Bird and Little Women, and even in those films, you see nods to how everything that she does is very intentional. She both writes it and directs it. So she creates the spaces, and then she sets them up. Whether it be like, you know, color palettes or setting or the dialogue, everything is very intentional with her. And so I think she is nodding and trying to get across to people who maybe, who wouldn't have picked up on that on their own. She's trying to point out how women always feel compelled to apologize for men and for men's bad behavior. Just because, you know, the stereotypes and how women are usually depicted is, you know, we are the nurturing, we are the emotional, we are, you know, the ones who can find the words to express these things, and so therefore we are responsible for it. And Yeah, so I definitely think it was intentional. I think it was on purpose to point out to people that Ken did not apologize, Barbie did. And because I don't think they would on purpose reproduce any sort of patriarchal practice without a good reason. So, and then also just how at the end we see Ruth is kind of the inventor of Barbie, and how she's kind of just shut away. She's a ghost of Mattel as Mattel sort of takes over, you know, the men of that company take over, and they are in control of how the consumption of womanhood is marketed to women. So that as well is also purposeful, I believe, on Gerwig's part.
Wow, they're doing such a great job discussing just a lot of material, but I want to just maybe talk about one more really important aspect of the film, which is Weird Barbie. Honestly, my favorite character from the film, and kind of what do we do with Weird Barbie and the messages that Weird Barbie sends, and then we'll pause and let's have some discussion maybe with the audience. So, you know, Weird Barbie is a key character in the film and is really kind of distinguished for her otherness, played by Kate McKinnon, masterfully played by Kate McKinnon, and one of the Barbies says, oh, you know, I heard Weird Barbie, she used to be the most beautiful Barbie of all, but then somebody played with her too hard in the real world, and now she's fated to an eternity of making other Barbies perfect while falling more and more into disrepair herself. That, and we all call her Weird Barbie, both behind her back and to her face. And so here we have the child playing in the real world with the Barbie doll, and then the result is that we have Weird Barbie. So what should we make of this character of Weird Barbie, and what about Weird Barbie's house? And I'm gonna maybe just go to Bailey and Elena on this one before we turn it over to the audience.
So I love Weird Barbie because she is very queer-coded, and it's not. And so queer coding, for those that don't know, it's where there's attributes added to a character that queer audiences will pick up as queer, but if you're not part of the community, you may not pick up on it. So one thing that stuck out to me was her very short haircut that was just very jagged, and anybody that grew up in the queer community, we all have that picture in our phone somewhere of the terrible short haircut we got. Mine was like to my chin. It was terrible. But no, that's a very pivotal experience I've seen of queer people growing up. So that's something that just very much read to me. And also she's very vulgar and open. I mean, she's putting her body in the splits. She's talking about Ken's misshapen blob and that kind of stuff. Like, what was the exact quote? Do you remember? Is it up there?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, talking about Ken in a sexual way, and that's just not something that's seen anywhere else in the Barbie movie other than in the real world. Like in Barbie Land, she's the only one doing that. But something else that I pointed out is that maybe there's some neurodivergence with her. I mean, being neurodivergent myself and also being a disability studies minor, I mean, there's definitely keys, especially with her being seen as weird for not fitting in with the societal norms, regardless if it's Barbie Land under patriarchy or not. And when she is under patriarchy in Barbie Land, she tends to lean more butch presenting versus when she's under non-patriarchal Barbie Land. She's very mismatched colors, very vibrant colors. Her house, it just doesn't fit in with the rest of the world. I mean, regardless of what space she's in, she's just not the normal. And that's why her house is able to be that consciousness raising space for the Barbies, where they can talk about, okay, how are we going to get back Barbie Land? Because she is the character that just doesn't fit no matter what. And she's fine with that.
Yeah, so I said that she kind of reminded me in her relationship to the other Barbies. She reminded me of this character from another movie. It's Pitch Perfect. And it's a movie about acapella. That's not important. There's a character that's in that movie named Fat Amy. And she says that she calls herself Fat Amy so that, and excuse my language, twig bitches like you don't do it behind my back. And I felt like Weird Barbie had kind of a similar relationship to the other Barbies. You know, she's called Weird Barbie behind her back and to her face. Like, she sort of, but she takes that and kind of embraces it as part of her personality. And I agreed with Bailey's take that she is very queer-coded. She doesn't really fit into this gender binary of Barbie and Ken. And then there are other Barbies that are also present in her house who also go against this sort of Barbie-Ken binary. So you have, you know, the TV Barbie, you have the sugar daddy Ken, you have Earring Magic Ken, who is also very queer-coded in that he's very like 90s gay club scene Ken. So you have all of these characters who are kind of the misfit, like queer-coded, you know, they don't fit into this gender binary of Barbie and Ken, who all end up at her house as this sort of consciousness-raising space and this very activist home.
Yeah, we had some other things about Alan and a few other things about the film, but I do want to make sure we allow time for the audience to ask questions, give comments, or respond or react to anything that the panelists have said. If anybody wants to share something, I think we got about 10 minutes in which to do that.
Hello.
A little quiet.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
Remember Thelma and Louise? That script was written by Callie Curry, and she said it was written because women don't drive the car. In all the movies she's seen, women never drove the car. And in that movie, they drive the car. In Barbie, she drives the car. And I think back in those 90s, the men didn't like Thelma and Louise because she drove the car and they were the stars, they ran the show. Here again, you have Barbie running the show. And I think for too many men, not Bob, but too many men just can't deal with that. And trolls like Ben Shapiro just will be trolls till they die. And if you were so weak, you were going to put a Barbie on fire, then have a nice day, Ben. Move on.
Thank you. Three things. Number one, I am so impressed with your comments of the panel. Right now, you're so enlightening, and I just appreciate your thought and just your being you. So thank you for that. You can give them a round of applause. Number two, with Weird Barbie, she was to me the most empathetic Barbie of them all, and went to the traditional Barbie's defense and helped her process everything she was going through there. I was just struck by that, and so she will always have a place in my heart. And I wonder if that's because those of us who have been marginalized in whatever way, we can relate to what the traditional Barbie was then going through. So maybe that might be an issue. So that was my second comment. And then thirdly, I do have a question of any panelists who would like to answer this, is in your comments initially, you were saying that one of the people, I don't know if it was Fox or whoever, said that we as men and women will not be able to work collaboratively together as we continue on. So as our panelists, as we move our society, American society, where we're living, where do you see us going in our discussion as a country, as a state, as your school, or whatever, in our dynamics with male and female? Where do you see that going? And then if in your classes you've had this discussion like you're having now with men, and I don't know if you've had men and women and other people who designate themselves, say, let's have this conversation, all of us. Did you have this kind of conversation? So is there any hope? Because at the end of the movie, they suggest, where are we going? So it's kind of like a question mark. Where do you see us going as men and female in our society? And have you had these conversations on your campuses?
That's an awesome question. Thank you so much for asking. So I think in terms of both the movie and of course the real world, at the end, when the Barbies take back Barbie Land, they do start offering space for Kens on like their Senate and like their cabinet, and like more active roles in society. And so I feel like whoever like conservative media that initially said that may not have been paying too close attention to the movie. But I do think that in terms of our society, like one of the problems is I feel just a lack of education and awareness about these things. And so a lot of people are ignorant to just how much like the patriarchy does pervade our society in both like micro and macro aggressions every single day, ingrained in our lives. And so I feel as though, especially on our campus, I feel like they're really great about offering so many different types of courses that offer enlightenment to students that then they can therefore take out into the world and spread that awareness as well. There's courses on masculinity, on femininity, queer theory classes, feminist theory classes, and so just offering the type of like education and people like really being willing to take those steps to seek out that information. I feel like there is hope. I feel like there are definitely people I know who have put in the work to understand, and we are able to have really great conversations and a great discourse about masculinity and femininity and where we can go from there.
I will say, just to add to that, I have taken quite a few gender studies classes. Obviously, that's why we're qualified to be here before you, but a trend that I've noticed in a lot of those classes is we do have a few male-identifying people who will come into the classroom and who will take those classes and engage with the ideas, which is great. However, it's not enough on its own, and something that's come up in a good deal of the classes that I've taken, when there's a guy in the classroom, sometimes just him speaking up and having an idea is taken as like precious and it's so great, and it is. It's great to engage with the material, but sometimes those guys are still going to reproduce the patriarchy in their words, and they might say something that's misogynistic or harmful in whatever way, or just not quite on the dot. And then what I've noticed then is if other people in the classroom try to say, hey, I actually don't agree with that, there's sort of like a whoa, no, defending what the guy said. Like, we should be encouraging men to speak up because it is still seen as something bad if you're, trying to be a guy who's a feminist. Like, people like Ben Shapiro and people who like him might still be like, you're not a real man, right? There is still some risk that comes with that, but the oppressed group is always still the oppressed group regardless. And so just if you know a guy in your life who's really interested in this stuff, or you are a guy who's really interested in this stuff, my advice is just sort of be mindful. And the same goes, hi, I'm sitting here before you and I am as white as you can get, right? So there is women of color feminism, there's indigenous feminism, there's a lot of disability studies that I can't speak on. And in those moments, I still need to learn to keep my mouth shut and pay attention when I'm told that what I'm doing is harmful. So I'm not preaching at anybody, but that is just something I've noticed. So if we can get past that, then I think there's hope. There's hope for sure.
Do we have time for any more? Or? Sure. Yeah. If there are any other comments or questions that anybody would like to raise?
This is actually a dead microphone.
Yeah. Do you want to come on? Sure. I thought it was kind of dying on you.
Yeah. By the end of the movie, did you feel as though Ken had reached a new consciousness himself and in the end was better off?
That's a great question. I know they have thoughts on this.
So I think in certain respects, yes. In certain respects, no. Because obviously, as we've mentioned, Barbie does all the emotional labor at the end. He never apologizes, and I think it seems to still be I think he finally gets it through his head that she's not interested in him by the end. But yeah, I feel like in that respect, he doesn't learn a lot. But I think in respect to understanding more of who he is as a person, I think that changes. Obviously, as they get to the end, he's kind of finally gets it through his head that he needs to figure out who he is on his own. He needs to figure out who he is just as Ken. And so I think in that respect, he definitely does gain something, and I think all of the Kens gain something. But yeah, I would say in respect to Barbie, there is still definitely not a great, like, I think he still doesn't quite get that, or like, you know, I think if we truly wanted to see him learn something in that respect, he would have had to have apologized to her.
Any other questions from the audience? Comments?
Just simply to say, we already did once, but I think that's never even enough, because we'd also like to thank our facilitator. Can we say thanks to all our panelists here?